All right. I guess we're live now. That's the cue. Cool. Thanks everybody for joining us. We are having our first Dealroom Talks. We're really excited to launch this series. We have some great guests today representing cities from around the globe. We will host this event periodically throughout 2022. Let's get the first one kicked off. The idea behind this series is to allow cities from around the world to share their startup ecosystem story. What are they doing? How have they done it? What challenges do they face? What's unique to their city and their part of the world? And today we have 3 cities. We actually have a 10-hour time difference. So we have, I'll let everybody introduce themselves briefly and a little bit about their organization. And maybe I'll start with you, Jeff. You are in the morning now in the West Coast, Las Vegas. Welcome.
Thanks, Darren. My name is Jeff Saling. I'm the executive director for Startup NV. We're a nonprofit organization that works with the city of Las Vegas and the state of Nevada as an incubator and accelerator for scalable startups in our region.
Gil.
Hey, I'm Gil Baxpehler from Cologne, Germany. I work for the Economic Development Agency of the city of Cologne. It's a 100% daughter company founded in 2019, so we're just turned 3 basically. Within that, I'm part of the startup unit, so we take care of our local ecosystem and much more is to follow.
Cool. Miikka?
Hey, I'm Miikka Neuvonen calling from Helsinki. We belong to the Economic Development Department of the City of Helsinki. We focus on startups and scale-ups, also on talent attraction and soft landing for companies wanting to base their companies to Helsinki, and mainly focus on the outgoing traffic, on pushing the companies to grow bigger and international.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for the introduction. I wanted to start off by asking sort of a question. We're all here because we're supporting the startup ecosystem, and we're trying to help our city make it the best it can, sustainable and be innovative. When did each of you, the city, start to think about like startups and why it's important to have your roles that exist at all? And thinking about that, like how has it been since you guys joined each of your organizations, and the growth of your ecosystem since? And maybe I'll start with you again, Jeff, and we'll go to Gil again, and then Miikka afterwards.
Sure. We've in Las Vegas and our state, Nevada, we're highly linked to tourism and gaming and hospitality. So every time there's an economic bump in the road, it seems like we experience a much stronger dip or a stronger reaction to it. So, originally people start talking in Las Vegas about we have to do something to diversify away, not necessarily that the gaming and all the things that make Las Vegas famous around the world, they're not bad. It's just that we'd like to do something more than that, so that when there is trouble with the travel and hospitality industry, that we've got other things that we can rely on in the ecosystem. So the conversation started in 2008, 2009 timeframe, and then we're of course exasperated by the COVID crisis. So it seems like people forgot about it being a priority as we recovered from 2008, 2009. We started our organization in 2017 to help that diversification, and the city of Las Vegas has been a supporter of that idea, for the past 3 or 4 years that we've been working together. And so it feels like it's something that everybody's taking a lot more seriously now, just as a way of not only keeping the local economy robust, but in diversifying it to things other than things that Las Vegas is already famous for.
Yeah, definitely. What about you, Gil?
Well, over here in Cologne, I think there have always been bits and pieces, but like in a structured way, 2018, the city started a project called Startup Unit. So they sort of saw there needed to be done something or much more. So in 2018, we actually started where we were still attached directly to the city, and a year later, we've been outsourced. Like the whole Economic Development Agency has been outsourced So I think people have seen what's going, around in other cities. If you take Berlin as an example, and surely probably leading in Germany, you could see the impact. And I mean, if you look at it today, there are more jobs created by startups or scale-ups than the big corporates or others. So it's easy to see that I think it makes sense to invest in that field, which is, what the city of Cologne has done. I think it was a smart move to outsource us, including the Economic Development Agency. And since that point, and I just said it, we're just literally 3 years old. We started in a very structural way to help the startups, to help the whole ecosystem, and it's been going only up from then, and I'm sure it's going to continue. So I think we were quite late, but we realized how important it is, and we're putting a big effort on it the recent years and the years to follow for sure.
Cool.
Yeah, I think we're quite in the whole startup and scale-up scene in Europe. I think we had the structure ready for companies to grow, and I think there were quite a few big growers before the cities and the municipalities were ready to offer the support they can nowadays and boost the growth from their side, especially in the gaming world. I mean, Supercell and Rovio, I think most of the people online now have sometimes played Clash of Clans or Angry Birds. And not too many of them actually know that the companies are Finnish by origin. It's been growing and growing, and in the last 7 years, we've in terms of funding rounds, the ecosystem has grown 5-fold to what it used to be, and it keeps on growing. This year is going to break the records of last year. And it seems that there are a few key features, like one of the most known startup events, Slush, that has played a big part in it. I actually met Gil there a few months ago, and there are a few items that seem to bring people to Finland and to Helsinki.
Awesome. Touching on that a little bit, you mentioned like gaming. I know, Jeff, I've asked you this before in terms of like, does Vegas have a sector focus? I know you guys are pretty agnostic and you just go after tech in general. Miikka and Gil, maybe I'll ask you guys this first. Is Cologne and Helsinki specifically focused on any sectors? And why do you think that is? And then what are you guys doing to maybe help foster that? Or are you like, how do you learn about what's growing and things like that in your ecosystem? And how do you look at that from like a sector perspective and how you figure out programming and stuff?
Miikka,
I can go first. Yeah, sure. Well, example for gaming, which is one of the most known fields in Helsinki, there are certain hubs that the city and different counterparts are pushing money into to bringing the key actors and players together. And I think one of the main reasons why our ecosystem here is blossoming is the ecosystem, the sense of togetherness, even when they're competing to be the best gaming studio in the world. I think they're still pushing each other and boosting each other in the right way. That the sense of competition isn't that dire here that it can be somewhere else. I mean, impact tech has been huge and it's growing. I mean, it's probably everywhere in the world, but it seems that we already have quite a few startups and scale-ups in the field that are doing quite well. And I have to mention deep tech and education and health, but yeah, that's quite a lot already. But I'll stop there.
Well, it's a bit similar in Cologne. I mean, we're a city with a population of 1 million, so we're not, we're decent size. Given that we know what kind of companies we have, we have about 60 to 70 direct insurers which have their hub in Cologne. So it was only on that aspect, at least, rather easy to to connect the dots and make sure that something is happening in that field. So from the city actually initiated something called the Insure Lab, and it's basically a hub connecting the insurance companies with innovation and startups locally as well as from all over the world. And that was an easy one because we have these insurers here. It's quite similar on the health front. We have a big health, like big numbers of companies and institutions here. So we set up another association in that field as well. So we kind of know which topics are big over here, and on that aspect, we try to even push it further or try to establish like an ecosystem around Gaming is another good example. We got the Gamescom, so we got the biggest games festival or event in the world. We have the esports league, ESL, just been bought for over $1 billion, which is the biggest esports company in the world. So it only makes sense to foster that and to build ecosystems around it to make sure we stay strong in that field.
Cool. No, thanks for that. Miikka, you mentioned Slush. Obviously, Vegas is home to lots of conferences. It's basically a mecca of conferences, among other things, including CES, which tons of startups now attend. You guys mentioned attending as well. Maybe for those that aren't familiar with Slush, like just a snippet about it. And I was curious to hear your thoughts, Jeff, on how like having that conference presence helps the ecosystem, and what you guys try to do around those type of conferences to capture the companies that are attending, to do outreach. Anything around that would be helpful, I think, to share. Maybe start with you, Jeff.
Sure. So, our focus, when the conferences come to town is to engage with the different, disciplines that are coming there to show off that, Las Vegas is a great place, not just to come and have a conference, which it is, but to actually make it a home, if not your new home, at least a place where you can extend your organization, especially for international companies coming into town that want to do business in the US. Our pitch is usually, well, if you're going to take a first step in the US, why not do it in Las Vegas? It's an awesome place to live. You get great access to the rest of the United States. We're right next door to California, which is a giant market all on its own. So those are usually the types of messages that we're talking to the people who are coming through, whether they're gaming people and tech people or something. Just there's all, like you said, Darren, just virtually every conference or every type of industry has some kind of conference in Las Vegas at some point during the year. So the message is similar, tailored a bit to what they do. So that's what we look at. And then in terms of, the things that we focus on, we of course, there's a fair amount of gaming and hospitality, gambling, gaming and hospitality tech that is alive and working in Las Vegas. But part of our effort is to grow beyond that. And we've purposely not zeroed in on a particular industry outside of the main one that everybody knows us for. We're looking for those companies that are going to scale. So we've been more focused on developing any good startup, making sure that there's capital available for them, making sure that the workforce is available for them, that our universities are focused on, cranking out the kinds of high-skilled workers that are required by these different industries. And I suspect, like we've seen with the other two great cities that I'm on the call with here, that over time we will develop something that can run parallel to the things that we're already famous for. But at the moment, we're looking at all the good ideas. We call it anything scalable, meaning that the founders are focused, eventually on growing their company rapidly, on raising venture capital to do that, and eventually, having some kind of a successful exit, which of course creates that awesome cycle of economic prosperity, where the founders do well, the investors do well, the employees do well, and that generates more startups, usually similar to the one that had success. And that cycle is the one that we're trying to get engaged with and get the momentum going around it.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Miikka, what I find interesting is that, like, I guess intuitively you wouldn't think of Helsinki as a conference destination. And obviously the government and private stakeholders have taken a lot of efforts to change that. And there's a nice conference center there. I'd be curious to hear more about like how that came about, and like how your guys' efforts are going today, and why you took that approach. I actually went to Slush. It was freezing cold, but I had a great experience. And I definitely want to go back, and it was awesome to see sort of the tech community there, particularly in Europe. So maybe talk a little bit about how that came about, and your thoughts around how the government sort of supports that.
Slush been running for roughly 10 years now. You always ever need is a few crazy students with the right decision makers in the same room at the right time, and that's what happened. And still completely student run. There are only a few handful of permanent employees that are always students that only work for a few years and then move on. And they felt there was a need to put Helsinki on the map internationally for startups. Quite a few people know that Finland as a nation has done quite well in educational studies and different kind of tests, and they know that there's a good workforce waiting for the companies whenever they land here. I mean, weather is something we won't change and cannot change. And yes, it can be quite rough. And Slush they were very smart. They made that into a trendy thing. There's a lot of slogans around Slush saying nobody in their right mind would end up in Helsinki in November except you badass, and so on. And they turned it into a movement. It's grown every year. I mean, of course, COVID-19 put a halt to it, but they've actually managed to turn that into a strength. So they were kicking out the big corporations and making it more about just meeting people, investors meeting startups and scale ups, and people meeting each other, um, essentially. And yeah, it's something that November as a whole is quite a slow month regarding conferences, and I think they just did a lot of the right things at the right time. And since they were one of the first ones to do it, I mean, they flew when they started. Silicon Valley was the thing. China wasn't that big yet. They weren't so aggressive in purchasing companies from Europe and so on. So they pulled all the strings they could. They talked to everyone who knew anyone in Silicon Valley, and they started hiring airplanes full of Silicon Valley people and basically forcing them at gunpoint to go to Helsinki, spread the cash around, and see what happens. And I think it worked. It was a bold tactic, and it wouldn't work anymore. But at the time, they really made it happen. And I mean, people are creatures of their habits. Once you enjoy yourself and you have a good vibe and you enjoy it, you tend to go back again and again and again.
Awesome. You mentioned meeting Gil in Vegas at CES. I'm curious to hear from all of you. How do you look at promoting your city, recruiting business to your city, just spreading the message, both on an international standpoint and then also at a local standpoint? And like, what are some things that you do maybe on each of those levels to help support grow the tech scene and tell people not in Cologne, outside of Europe, maybe about what's happening there, or in Vegas, outside of Vegas, in Europe, what's happening in Vegas to be a landing spot for other companies? What kind of things are you guys doing around that? Start with Gil, maybe.
Well, I think what we do, or what I do most of the time, is kind of showing what we have. I mean, if I talk to people internationally outside of Germany, then most people don't know that much about Cologne. And I think this is the point we try to tackle. If you look at our infrastructure, if you look at the things we have, we could be up there with the big ones. If you look at the requirements of a startup ecosystem, if you like. But everybody internationally knows Berlin, maybe Munich. So what I try to do and try to make sure is that people are aware that actually there's a region, a city in Cologne, in the area, which is economically stronger than others, has more companies, more universities. So I think once people know, people look at me, it's like, wow, I didn't know that. So this is one of the aspects I'm trying to do, to put Cologne on the map, because nobody knows anything about Cologne. I'm sure you guys don't know much about Cologne either, right? So if I would give you the full rundown, you would probably say, wow, that sounds quite good. So this is definitely one of the aspects we're trying to do. We're trying to put Cologne on the map to make sure people know what they can get over here. Locally, it's a bit more difficult, because locally, obviously, people know about Cologne, know the areas. But locally, I don't think it's a big issue. Locally, we've seen an influx, I would even say, of startups and entrepreneurs coming towards our area. Has several reasons, but so it's obviously very positive. Internationally, it's a different aspect, and we need to make sure we put Cologne on the map, which it isn't. So that's our sort of main focus. And of course, we do have we have a welcome package and these kind of landing pads. we do all have these. I think everybody by now more or less has them, bigger or smaller, but we do all have that, but it's not enough. If you don't know about it, then it doesn't help. So apart from these things, we need to make sure we're on the map.
I have another question related to that, but I'll let Jeff and Miikka answer first, and I'll come back to it. Go ahead, Jeff.
Great. So like Gil talked about, we kind of had two different strategies, one for internal to the US, and then one for international, right? So Vegas has a great reputation internationally. Most everybody has heard of us through lots of sort of social cues and other plays. So we try to play off of that to say more than, just, and then whatever movie it is that you might have seen that's based in Las Vegas or has references to Las Vegas. So we try to highlight the companies and the success stories, through social media, through news stories, through conferences like this, and also as people come through town, through on CES and all the other events, to try to have some sort of platform to speak to them that makes sense. And that really works well for the international companies. And there's also, and the thing that works well within the United States, particularly, with our neighbor to the west, and the state of California next to us, is that the tax basis and the regulatory environment in Nevada, the state of Nevada, which is where Las Vegas is located, is much more open. Well, the tax rates are lower, the cost of doing business is lower, the lifestyle is a little bit simpler and easier to live. So and we've seen huge increases in people coming into our state in the last couple of years because of that, where people are trying to simplify, where they're now, with the Great Resignation and all of the other things that are going on, people are choosing where they want to work. And there's a lot of reasons that they would want to work in Nevada and specifically in Las Vegas. So we use all of those features to attract talent, which then of course is going to build new great companies, and we can feature those, through all of our marketing outreach, whether it's the people through the conventions that come through town, or just through our communications on the various social media platforms and news stories that we're able to get out into the ether.
For us, in terms of funding for very early stage startups, there's quite a lot of public funds in place that tend to attract, especially startups with an idea or just a thought of a business idea from the neighboring countries. They tend to come to, they get the first 1 or 2 years for free. Life's never free, but in theory, you get quite a lot of boost from these public funding mechanisms. But I think there's one thing that hasn't been mentioned yet that we do is we kind of use the soft value, which we try to educate them on the work-life balance in Finland, which is something we're kind of known of, and well, we're proud of it actually, that people tend to work maximum 10 hours a day, even in a startup, that people have time for activities and family and so on. And I think that's one of the approaches that has worked quite well. People are getting tired on this never-ending cycle of emails and calls and so on coming in. I think they want a limit between working and free time. I think that's something that we can offer.
Yeah, definitely. I think work-life balance is probably more important than a lot of aspects to a lot of people these days. And it's interesting to see what cities are doing to really like start to understand that and put that into part of their messaging, and how companies are adapting that as well. I certainly think Las Vegas is conducive to a work-life balance as well. I don't know about Cologne, actually. You can answer that. And also I'll start with you on the next question as well, Gil. You had mentioned it earlier briefly that I think maybe more traditional methods aren't enough anymore in terms of being able to like maybe reach companies and share your story. Like, what do you think Cologne can be doing? What do you think cities in general, from an economic development standpoint, can do better to support startups, both locally, but also, internationally, to get the word out, right? In general, it starts with that. And I'll preface it with saying, sounds like a lot of you guys have said already, is that there's that human interaction component. It's meeting with the person, it's having a conversation, and I think sometimes a lot of us can like lose sight of that. It's that, especially during the last couple of years, and I think that's also super important too. It's really having that human touch, understanding where they're coming from, what they're doing, how you actually can support them, not through reform but through a conversation. So yeah, going back to my question, Gil, how do you like, how does Cologne look at that, and maybe talk a little bit about the city's efforts there? I want to say we were 26 minutes in, and it was the first you're on mute, so like that's pretty good, you know. So hopefully
not bad. Okay, so well, since we started, something we're trying to do is engage very much with the startup, with the local ecosystem, right? I think it's the worst thing is you could do that the city or the cities know everything by themselves. So you need to speak, you need to attend events, you need to get out into the ecosystem, dive in, make sure you understand what the startup needs, and then try to, at least I wouldn't say tailor, but try to make sure that you address those needs. So something that when you mentioned it's the physical component, I think is very important as well. So what we've tried to do since the beginning is to get out people, make sure people know about us. And for us, it's usually quite simple. All our services are for free. So it's, so there's nothing you can lose if you talk to us. There's only something you can win if, something comes out. So I think once people understand that we're actually, sometimes people have the impression that people within the city are like, the older guys who sit behind the desk and don't do very much, So we need to try to change that picture to make sure that we're actually, all of us, very much out there engaged with the ecosystem, very much trying to help. And I think once people understand that and they see that you're not totally on the wrong path, then it's easy to engage. And then, they take them with you, they tell you what they need. We have endless conversations, and build on or based on that, we try to then tailor our services towards their needs. And I think once you do that, we also try to make sure that we don't step into any competition with any existing organization or any startup, right? So if we are thinking about a service that could be useful, we make sure nobody else covers that. If so, we say, fair enough, let's support them if we can. If not, we do something else. So we're trying to fill the gaps, if you like, what is needed within our local ecosystem, and that could be different on all aspects. But that's sort of how we started and engaged with everyone.
Thanks. That's really interesting. I'm curious to know, you guys all have basically, like Jeff, you're a nonprofit, so you're a little bit unique, and I'll ask you a question related to that. But Miikka and Gil, since you actually work for the government organization in your city, and they have a specific group dedicated to startups, right? Which isn't everywhere in the world. It's not every city. There's not a startup envy everywhere. There's not a New Helsinki or Startup Cologne. So I'm curious how anybody listening, watching, how do you articulate, how why does your department exist and how did that come about? And how do you talk about startups internally? Right. I sometimes governments struggle with how do we talk about what's happening? Like, what does this all mean? From your guys' perspective, like how do you relay those messages internally, either, to get funding for things or anything related to your efforts to build it? How does that process work? And maybe what advice would you have to anybody who's, trying to help build it? And maybe they're, they don't have a dedicated unit or group yet to it.
The strengths in our approach in the whole idea was that they needed experts of certain fields to be there, be the eyes and ears in the field. And so the way we approached it, we are running a few hubs and one accelerator program ourselves, but on the side we've divided our people into verticals. So there are people who come from gaming that only focus on the gaming. They're always there. Not too many people, I suppose, don't even realize that these people are working for the city. They just know that's the game startup guy, that's the health guy from whatever organization. We try to be proud of what we do, but it's not that we approach them city first. We go there and we try to help. Everything that Gil said in his last answer just fits and adapts to what we do and our model perfectly as well.
Well, there's not much I can add on Miikka now, even though I think most cities, at least the bigger ones, have either like a startup unit or some sort of people who nowadays take care of the startups, right? At least the ones who realized how important it is. But at least for the German European aspect, most bigger cities have it. I'm part of a couple of networks, and they all have it. And I agree with Miikka. We have it very similar. So we have experts sitting on different industries or on topics. So these guys have the networks, these guys have the knowledge, and we have 4 people within our startup unit. Probably additional person is coming, and it's not always easy with the city. We're trying to also be like in between the city and the startup ecosystem, which is not always easy. But I think we're also it's part of our job, and it works as well. It takes a bit of time, but it works as well. So we're trying to build up the expertise to make sure people are wanting to come to us rather than not knowing about us or anything like it.
And if I can quickly add to Darren's question, I think I hope I don't sound too much now, but Dealroom has really helped us to explain what we do for living. It helps us to show figures and facts of the ecosystem, the trends, and so on. It's caused a few movements already. Like now, there's a big program targeted at female-founded startups and scale-ups. We need more and more diversity. We need the equality to come from the workplace into the founders outreach, and that's all because we did a questionnaire with Dealroom. But you need something to base your decisions on, and Dealroom has really helped us to map it out and push it in the mayor's face and say, we need more money. This is what's happening. You guys don't realize that the whole entirety of it without somebody pointing it out. And it's good. It's not a thing we do. It's not a questionnaire or a survey. It's an international company providing us the figures. It's easier to stand behind that.
Thanks for the unsolicited promotion. I appreciate it. Jeff, you're a nonprofit, so you're probably similar, and you deal with the city and then also the private sector as well, and you operate on funds, and sometimes you apply for grants to keep running. How does that all work for you? And what challenges do you face being a nonprofit in this, not solely part of the government or in the private sector, but in this in between that relies on funding?
So yeah, we are absolutely in between, and I'll give you one more piece of unsolicited praise, Darren, in that signed on with Dealroom, partnered with the city of Las Vegas, is precisely for the reasons that Miikka just talked about. We didn't, and we've only been on board for about 6 months, so we haven't collected all of the data that we want to collect, so we can also make those points that Miikka was talking about objectively. Whether those points are for us to go out and raise funding from corporate sponsors that want to see us succeed in creating a robust, diversified startup ecosystem in Las Vegas, or it's from government grants that we need to apply for in the various types of industries that both the city wants to emphasize in their economic plan, and the federal government, who's giving out grants for various things, and how we can be supportive in making that happen. I think in some ways, because we aren't the government and we aren't the city ourselves, it makes it sometimes easier for us to do business by being sort of in between all of these people. It also makes it easier for us to be a little bit more overt about raising capital funds. I mean, actually going out and starting a venture fund that can operate right alongside of the nonprofit, with the nonprofit sort of generating the deal flow, so that the investors in the market can get engaged in that deal flow and expect to make a profit from their investments, because that's a for-profit operation and an activity that we run. And then the nonprofit is on the founder side, really helping the founders with the education and the events and some of the other things that you guys were talking about, you have to pay attention to as a city to get engaged with. Well, a lot of those events are events we put on and things that we do. So we are engaged, and we make sure that our partnership with the city and with all of our sponsors, whether they're corporate sponsors or government sponsors by way of grant, is how we continue to operate, which, in some ways is a little bit more nerve-wracking because, just like a startup, you have to remain relevant and you have to provide services that people want. Otherwise, the funding stops. You just if you don't stay relevant, you're not doing, really valuable work and providing valuable services, week by week, quarter by quarter, then at some point you go out of existence. So we have not had that problem. We're grown by leaps and bounds, and are looking for ways to, to brag about what we've got going on and all the things that we've done and will be doing in Las Vegas.
Awesome. Jeff, you mentioned like potentially partnering on funds. I was curious for Miikka and Gil, how does Cologne and Helsinki get involved in the venture community? And are they actively looking to potentially actually invest through the government? Or how do the cities look at that?
He's muted, so I can go first. Good. I think the way we do is we try to pay a lot of the subsidies for the ecosystem. So one of the biggest hubs in the Northern Europe, Maria 01, for example, they're mainly paid and sponsored by the city of Helsinki. So we want to be on the grassroots level, supporting in the mechanisms, in not directing money or cash straight from us to them, but rather creating the ecosystem from our side. It's something that there aren't too many mechanisms where the city hands out money, pure cash, to anyone, but there are ways that we can be there and building, if it's physical locations or even virtual locations. I think that's where the cities come in.
Yeah, it's worth a trip to Maria 01, by the way. It's really nice. Well, in Cologne, it's I think it's always difficult for a city to hand out money, and we don't hand out money to individuals anyway. So what we're trying to do is we obviously engage with investors. We have a VC network. We have another network of investors. So we're trying to get them engaged. And I think what we also do is, for example, we support, and sometimes it could be due to a sponsoring, so we could, then really spend money, is, for example, like an event, which, could be like a matchmaking event between investors and startups, or anything like that. We're also trying to have our investors engage with us, but also internationally. So we're trying to draw in more international investors, which is something that Cologne needs, more investments from outside. But yeah, so I think we're trying to engage with the investors to also see, similar to the startups, to see what are their needs, what do they need in order to invest more, and we support sort of events or programs, projects, initiatives that go in that direction. We have to make sure that it's beneficial to basically everyone or a group, not individuals.
Yeah, maybe give an example of a program that you guys put on that supports it.
Well, we have something which is called, for example, an investors evening, or something like investors evenings. Basically, it started off by appreciating the investors. So the mayor, the Lord Mayor of Cologne, invited all the investors of Cologne and the region for like a nice dinner. We had 1 or 2 selected startups to pitch, but we wanted to make sure that the investors among each other get to know each other, exchange, get to know us. And that evolved into like a series of, if you like, investors evenings. So once a year we kind of do that to foster a little bit with the investors. But we also have like a masterclass where we take the top startups of different programs, who then get the chance to speak, talk, get mentoring from specific investors as well. So we have a couple of those running. And we always look for new ones as well, and we look around to see what others do and whether we can make use of that too.
One additional way is that I know a lot of the Nordic countries, at least to Nordic cities, is organizing innovation challenges of sorts. So you have corporate sponsors obviously in place, but normally the city ends up matching whatever the corporate side is putting in. So there's a lot on climate, for example, at the moment that the city of Helsinki wants to be involved in, and they wouldn't do it alone, but then they get the call. I think beds as a whole, the city wants to be known as a test bed for everything. If it's smart movement, if it's carbon dioxide reduction, if it's anything to do with better future and in a way, but environmental friendly, the city is always opening challenges.
Awesome. A lot of space in Las Vegas for test bed. Jeff, what about you in terms of programs locally that you think would be interesting for folks to hear about?
Well, thanks for the mention. Las Vegas is one of the most aggressive cities in terms of smart city type technology and just adopting and adapting all of those technologies into the city. We got the big boring tunnel now, boring company tunnel, which they just dug underneath all the convention centers to allow people to go back and forth between the various locations and convention centers. A lot of other really interesting smart city Vegas. So it's cool to see happening. With regard to programs that we run, so we run pitch days to get deal flow for the funds that we operate, on the for-profit side of the equation. So that's we do them every other week. Try to find the best companies that want. We say it's pitch day for 50K, and usually that's our minimum investment. So we get a lot of people who are trying to raise money for their startups to come out and talk to us and talk to the community. We do open it up to the community, so it's a little bit like. Hopefully people know that there's an American television program called Shark Tank, where people pitch to the sharks, and it's a bit entertaining. We're not quite as entertaining as them, and we don't make fun of people, but we do run that. And another program we run on the investor side, we call Angel NV, where we gather 40 investors, each of whom wants to learn how to be an angel investor, and they each put $5,000 into a fund. And so we have a $200,000 fund to invest. We tell our community that, hey, this group has $200,000 to invest, and a bunch of companies apply. And then we use that process of vetting those companies, narrowing them down to 6 finalists, doing due diligence on those companies, and we have a nice event at the end in Las Vegas City Hall and City Council chambers, where those final 6 companies pitch one. We've been engaged with them for 13 weeks, and then one of those companies is chosen as a winner. And we do it in a very public way. Again, we invite the public to look at the pitches. We now, at the end, there's at least one company. Last year's program, we actually had 52 investors, and we raised $350,000. So we invested in 3 companies instead of just one. We never know whether we're going to get there when we start. This year, we just started that program. Actually, the first meeting for it is tonight. When all you guys are asleep, we'll be having our first meeting for Angel NV tonight. But in doing that in our community, we create some excitement, and a few companies get investment. And we are also sort of grassroots building our angel ecosystem. And those are the people who tend to be the very first money in to some of these early stage startups, whereas the more mature venture capital firms, they tend to want to see companies that have a bit more of a track record. They make larger investments, but the requirements are also higher, which is difficult when your startup ecosystem is still in its early days, where a lot of the companies that are getting started, they're brand new and they don't have a long track record. So they need that really early stage investment. And we've found that that's an effective way of starting from a grassroots level to build something that we think will last for decades to come.
Yeah. Sounds like you're not too busy then. By the way, Shark Tank's been syndicated everywhere now. There's definitely a German version. What's it called, Gil? Is it
Höhle der Löwen, which is like the lion's cage.
Lion's Den? Yeah, that's what it is.
Lion's Den.
Yeah, there's Australian version. It's got everywhere. Cool. Next question for everybody. Success in my city my ecosystem looks like this in 5 years? We'll start with you, Miikka.
Gee, thanks. I think in 5 years it would mean that the city's efforts have been diminishing year by year. It means that the ecosystem is starting to feet. They're becoming more mature. The investors and the founders are already on their second, third, and fourth round after successful exits. There's more international money, more foreign VCs having their, if not HQs, then at least offices in Helsinki. I think all in all that there's less need for attracting capita, foreign money to the country, and just basically utilizing of what we already have because of our efforts in the next 5 years.
Who next, Aaron?
Anybody?
Well, I'll build on what Miikka says. So we want to create our own weather system, right? Where founders are starting companies, they're getting that early stage investment. There's bigger VCs that follow on to that investment. Eventually they exit. Those founders go out, buy some cool toys because they think they're going to retire. They get bored in about 90 days. They start new companies. And they also raise investment. So creating that weather system that's self-perpetuating is that momentum point that we're looking for. And I'm digging to try to figure out exactly how do you quantify that? Does that mean that you need to have, 100 companies getting funded every year at the very lowest or earliest stage of investment, and then 60% of those companies survive to the next stage, and it's and et cetera? There is a mathematical formula that you can put behind it, and we're working on some of the metrics for that right now. But if 5 years is hard to measure success when you're starting from a brand new system where there's not a lot of activity around this. Most startups don't reach an exit for 7 to 9 years. So I know I'm thinking more in terms of a 10-year plan than a 5-year plan. But along the way, you can see those indicators of, okay, well, when we started, there were no venture funds, no early stage venture funds in Las Vegas. Now there are 2. And there are 2 more that are on the way. We worked with our state legislature to change some of the laws that were a little confusing about if you were an investor and you were looking into Nevada. Now we've made our laws the same as the national laws, which makes it easier and more comfortable for people who want to be investors to do so from a base in Nevada rather than having to invest from outside. And with the idea that we won't be the only ones doing this in 5 years, right? There'll be more accelerators, there'll be more incubators, there'll be more venture funds, and all of that activity will be going on all around us, not just, sort of having to pass through us to get something started. So I wish I could give you the formula. We're still trying to work on it, but it is something like, a few hundred early stage startups getting funding every year, and then kind of going through that evolution of pre-seed funding to seed funding to A round funding to however many more successive rounds you need to have before you have an exit, sort of over that 10-year journey, and just having goals at each of those stages, so that you can tell that you're making progress, and hopefully the whole thing gets bigger and bigger and bigger over time, but having some of those initial goals is kind of what we're working on right now.
Well,
Not on mute this time.
No. I stopped that, but doesn't even much to add for me. Even though, so obviously what the gentleman said before me, but I think for Cologne, we are quite an early stage emerging ecosystem. So I think what I want to see the next years is maturing, right? I want to see the ecosystem mature. That includes more FDI from, international investors, these kind of things. I could go on, but most of the things I would say would probably repeat what you guys have said already. So this is an add-on that maybe is special to Cologne.
Thanks. Someone in the audience asked, how do universities play a role in your ecosystems? Maybe we'll start with you, Jeff, this time.
We do a lot of events with both the main university and our town, UNLV, the University of Nevada at Las Vegas. So we do a lot of events with students. There are clubs that the students run. One in Las Vegas is called the Rebel Venture Fund, the Rebel being the mascot of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So we have a lot of the students come in and work in our internship programs, and then I also teach a class at the university, which helps get the word out about what it is that we're doing and trying to make entrepreneurship interesting for these students, and not just the business people, but the engineering students and the medical students and others with the more scientific brains to be interested in entrepreneurship as a life. So that's generally how we're engaging with the university.
I jump ahead now, Miikka. Yeah? No, I'm very polite to the Finnish guys, so please go ahead. No? Okay, then let me start. So, well, we have a lot of students. About 10% of our population in Cologne are students. So we try to do a lot there as well. Specifically, in the coming years, we want to do much more go into deep tech, which obviously involves the universities. We have like we call it like an ecosystem round, like once a quarter at least. We have an exchange with sort of the major stakeholders of the startup ecosystem. Universities are part of that. We also have organizations similar to what Jeff mentioned who try to actually draw in students rather than going to corporates, trying the entrepreneurship startup track, if you like. So we support all that. The University of Cologne, they all have their departments who do things and work with their own startups, right? At least over here. All the universities have now basically, I don't want to say startup teams, but like people who take care of their startups. One of them was with me at the Slush. He's probably going with me to Tel Aviv in a couple of months. So the universities got very active in that field. So there's a very close exchange that we have with them to see where we can just help them, make sure they know about us, very similar to what Jeff said again. So yes, we're in close contact, close touch, and we do quite a few of projects together and to support each other where we can.
In here, there's a big and from the government as a whole to boost entrepreneurship, to make it sexy to be an entrepreneur again. There are quite a few programs that are now running that the city of Helsinki is funding. Campus incubators, for example, that's aimed directly at students finishing their studies, wondering what to do with their lives. All the universities and universities of applied sciences have their own entrepreneurial societies of sorts. So there's a lot of action and movement going on in that, and that's also part of where the city plays a big role. I think one of the big topics at the moment in Finland, I'm not sure if it's a European thing, but is how to get scientific research funded more. They're not typical startups. They're not going to scale majorly. They're not going to be maybe the big breakthroughs, but there's a lot of talk on how that sort of angel money and VC money could be also somehow directed to the universities.
Yeah, definitely. I think R&D will become bigger and bigger component of ecosystems moving forward. All right, we have about 6 minutes. Maybe I guess one last question for everybody. And Gil, I'll give you a minute to answer, but everybody else 30 seconds, since I'd love to learn a little bit more about Cologne. But I'd like to take the end of this event series and maybe just ask everybody to give their 30-second pitch of their city. So why Helsinki, why Cologne, and why Las Vegas? Gil, you can have a little bit more time because you alluded earlier, people don't probably know much about Cologne. So in like 60 seconds or less, I'll start with you. Why Cologne?
All right. Just make sure you give me the countdown in the last 10 seconds or something. So basically, why Cologne? So I think to give you a couple of arguments, we are an absolute B2B hotspot, right? We're one of the strongest economic regions in Europe, right? By far the strongest economic region in Germany. We have about 60 to 65,000 corporates alone in Germany. We have a huge catchment area, the biggest in Europe. If you step in your car for 1 hour, you drive for 1 hour, you reach 17 million people, right? Only London can compare, but London itself has about 10 or something. Hey there. We are digital infrastructure #1 in Germany, but I also want to mention the non-digital infrastructure. So as Germans, we have the roads, but we also have 3 airports around. We have the railroads, we have the rivers, We have more than 20 higher education institutions. We have more than 100,000 students, so the talents are on the way already. We have huge innovative science and research hubs all around. I think we're number 6 or 7 as a trade fair city, given the size. So we have trade fairs in all aspects. What else? I think I mentioned most of it. I think what also helps over here is that we have a specific mentality that we're known of. So we welcome everybody. We're very open. So it's easy to make business over here. The state, North Rhine-Westphalia, is also the one with the most inhabitants within Germany. Well, what else? Of course, I could say
you don't have to fill the whole minute up. That was pretty good.
No, that's fine. I'm gonna end here. And of course now, and I'm guessing most people will say that, but of course you have us, right? So we're really engaging, and we're very happy to talk to anybody who's interested in Cologne. Could give you a couple more arguments, but I would say just get in touch, get your own picture, and I'm very welcome, or I'm very happy to welcome you over here. And now I'm mute.
Miikka.
Helsinki, according to many studies, is one of the best places to live in the world. Work-life balance, equality in terms of everything in life, free education all the way to the university. People are honest, hardworking, straight talking, straight shooting, modest, but when you make a friend out of a Finn, they'll be friends for life. That's it.
All right, Jeff.
Thanks for having us out here today. So Las Vegas is, I mean, we keep getting articles that we're the fastest growing startup ecosystem in the US. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One is some of the things that you guys talked about. Las Vegas is the most connected city to the rest of the United States. So if you need to take a flight somewhere, there's more direct flights to other cities from Las Vegas than in any other place in the United States. We have a great workforce that's trained at the university and is actively recruited into the ecosystem. And the reason that they like to come is this thing. And people have moved to Las Vegas, usually about 3 months after they've moved there. They almost always say these words, "I had no idea." And it's not because they're foolish. It's because they thought that Las Vegas was just the Strip. And when you get to town and you start to meet the actual citizens and the people and engage with the city and organizations like ours, you realize this is a really great place to live, to raise a family. It's easy to get around. I mean, because the world comes to us, we have all of these world-class entertainers and world-class restaurants and world-class everything that's there, built for the 60 million people that come through our town every year. And you can just have a great life there with access to everything. So check out Las Vegas. Either check it out through the city, give us a holler at startupnv.org. We'd love to engage.
Amen. Yeah, and everybody's LinkedIn handle is in the Hop-in invite, so feel free to message anybody, reach out to us. Thanks everybody for joining us. I hope this was informative. It's interesting for me to learn. I hope for everybody else as well, how many similarities as much as differences we all have in common, regardless of where we are in the world. We're all trying to support startups and help them grow. So I hope we can do this again. And yeah, thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.